I'm worth $40 million and I live in a 300 square foot studio apartment with a Murphy bed, a hot plate, and a bathroom so small I have to step into the shower to close the door. The irony isn't lost on me. Every morning, I wake up in this cramped space that most people would consider barely habitable, while my bank accounts hold enough money to buy a mansion in every major city in America. But there's a reason I choose to live this way. And it's a story that began with the worst decision I ever made and the best lesson I never wanted to learn. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 years ago, I had everything a 35-year-old tech entrepreneur could want: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of classic cars worth more than most people's houses, a private jet that I used to fly to Michelin starred restaurants on different continents just because I could. I was the founder and CEO of CloudSync, a data management company that had just gone public, and I was living the American dream on steroids. The press called me a visionary. Forbes put me on their cover. I had arrived, or so I thought. The thing about having that much money is that it changes you in ways you don't even notice at first. It's like gaining weight. You don't see it happening day by day, but one morning you wake up and nothing fits anymore. Except instead of clothes, it's your soul that doesn't fit. You start to believe that your worth as a human being is directly tied to your net worth. You begin to think that because you can afford anything, you deserve everything. And worst of all, you stop seeing other people as people and start seeing them as either assets or liabilities. I should have seen the signs. The way my assistant Janet would flinch slightly when I snapped at her for booking the wrong restaurant. The way my driver, Miguel, would go quiet when I complained about traffic as if it were somehow his fault. The way my younger sister Emma's face would fall when I'd cancel our monthly dinners for the third time in a row because some business opportunity had come up. But I was too high on my own success to notice, too intoxicated by the power that comes with unlimited resources. The beginning of the end started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in my home office, a room larger than my current entire apartment, reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer. Marcus? The voice was shaky, uncertain. This is Marcus Chen. Who's this? It's it's David. David Ramirez. We went to college together. I frowned, searching my memory. David Ramirez. The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place a face to it. In college, I had been laser focused on my studies and building my first startup. I hadn't had time for many friendships. David, I said, pretending to remember more than I did. How did you get this number? I I found it through a mutual friend. Marcus, I know this is awkward, calling you out of the blue like this, but I'm in a really bad situation and I didn't know who else to turn to. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and immediately my defenses went up. This was it. Another person from my past crawling out of the woodwork to ask for money. It happened more often than you'd think. College acquaintances, distant relatives, former coworkers, all with sob stories and outstretched hands. What kind of situations? I asked, already mentally composing my polite but firm rejection. My daughter. She's 8 years old and she needs surgery, heart surgery. The doctors say it's urgent and our insurance won't cover all of it. We're looking at about $60,000 out of pocket and we just don't have it. I work two jobs, my wife works full time, but we barely make ends meet as it is. There was a pause and I could hear him breathing heavily, trying to maintain his composure. I know we weren't close in college, Marcus, and I know this is a huge ask, but I've exhausted every other option. I've set up a GoFundMe. I've applied for medical loans. I've asked everyone I know. So I saw an article about you in Business Week about how successful you've become, and I thought maybe. His voice trailed off, and in that silence, I felt a flicker of something. Not quite compassion. I had trained that out of myself years ago, but maybe curiosity. $60,000 was nothing to me. I spent more than that on wine in a typical month. It was less than what I paid my personal trainer annually. But then my business mind kicked in. If I said yes to David, word would get out. More people would call. More hands would be extended. I'd become a target for every hard luck story in America. It would be a slippery slope from philanthropist to Mark. David, I said, adopting the tone I used in boardrooms when delivering bad news, I understand you're in a difficult situation, but I'm sure you can appreciate that I get requests like this constantly. If I helped everyone who asked, I'd go broke. Have you considered taking out a second mortgage? Or maybe starting a business on the side? The silence that followed was deafening. When David finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. A second mortgage? Marcus, we rent a one-bedroom apartment. And starting a business? I work 14 hours a day just to keep food on the table. I thought maybe someone who had been blessed with so much success might be willing to help a desperate father save his daughter's life. The word blessed hit me wrong. I hadn't been blessed. I had worked. I had sacrificed. I had earned every penny of my fortune through intelligence, determination, and countless 18-hour days. No one had given me anything. I'm sorry, David, but I can't help you. I'd suggest looking into charity organizations or perhaps crowdfunding. There are resources out there for people in your situation. I hung up before he could respond. The conversation had already taken longer than I wanted, and I had real work to do. I had a conference call with investors in 20 minutes, and I needed to prepare. But something about that call stuck with me throughout the day. Maybe it was the way David's voice had cracked when he mentioned his daughter, or maybe it was the word blessed echoing in my mind. As I went through the motions of my incredibly privileged day, my personal chef prepared lunch, my stylist selected my clothes for an evening gala, my accountant briefed me on how much money I had made while sleeping, I kept thinking about a little girl I'd never met who needed heart surgery. That evening, I attended a charity auction for childhood cancer research. It was the kind of event I went to regularly, not out of any genuine desire to help sick children, but because it was good for business. The right people were there, the kind of people who could open doors and create opportunities. I bid on and won a week at a luxury resort in Bali for $75,000. Not because I wanted to go to Bali, but because winning the highest ticket item of the night sent a message about my financial prowess. As I accepted polite applause for my generous bid, I thought about David Ramirez again. $75,000 for a vacation I would probably never take, but $60,000 to save a child's life was too much to ask. The next morning, I tried to put the call out of my mind. I had a company to run, deals to close, money to make. But David's voice kept creeping back in, especially the part where he said he worked two jobs. I couldn't remember the last time I'd worked for someone else, couldn't imagine being in a position where someone else controlled my income, my schedule, my life. Out of curiosity more than anything else, I had my assistant research David Ramirez. It didn't take her long to find him. David A. Ramirez, 36 years old, married to Sofia Ramirez, father to Isabella Ramirez, age 8. He worked as a night security guard at an office building downtown and drove for a ride-sharing service during the day. His wife worked as a home health aide. According to public records, they lived in a small apartment in Queens and had no significant assets. Janet also found Isabella's GoFundMe page. There was a photo of her, a beautiful little girl with dark hair and braids and a smile that could light up a room, despite the medical equipment visible in the background. The page had raised $843 of its $60,000 goal. $843. I spent more than that on a single bottle of wine at dinner the night before. I stared at that photo for a long time. Isabella was wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon princesses, and she was giving a thumbs up to whoever was taking the picture. Despite everything she was going through, she was trying to be brave, trying to smile. It reminded me of something, some distant memory that I couldn't quite grasp. The memory hit me suddenly, so forcefully that I actually gasped. I was 7 years old, lying in a hospital bed after having my tonsils removed. My parents couldn't afford a private room, so I was in a ward with 5 other kids. I was terrified of the hospital, of the surgery, of being away from home. But there was another kid in the bed next to me, a boy named Tommy, who was there for something much more serious than tonsils. Tommy was the one who made me feel better. He told me jokes, shared his pudding cups with me, and assured me that the nurses were nice and that everything would be okay. Tommy had been in and out of that hospital for months, fighting some kind of blood disease that I was too young to understand. But he never stopped smiling, never stopped trying to make other people feel better. On my last day there, as my parents were taking me home, Tommy gave me his favorite toy, a small robot that transformed into a car. He said he wanted me to have it so I'd remember to be brave. I never saw Tommy again, but I kept that robot for years. It sat on my desk through high school, through college, through the early days of building my company. Somewhere along the way, I had lost it. Or maybe I had thrown it away, deciding it was childish, inappropriate for a successful businessman's office. Looking at Isabella's photo, I saw Tommy's smile. I saw his courage. And for the first time in years, I felt something crack inside my chest, some protective wall I had built around my heart starting to crumble. I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. Hello? He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. David, it's Marcus Chen. We spoke yesterday. Marcus. His voice went flat. Look, I'm sorry about calling you. I know you're busy, and I shouldn't have. I want to help, I interrupted. The $60,000 for your daughter's surgery, I'll cover it. The silence that followed was different from the day before. This time it was filled with hope rather than despair. Are you serious? David's voice was shaking. I'm serious. I'll have my assistant contact the hospital today and arrange payment. I I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much. Isabella is going to be so happy. She's been so scared, and we've been trying to stay positive for her, but we didn't know how we were going to make this work. You've literally saved her life. Just take care of your daughter, I said, and hung up. I called Janet and had her handle the details. Within 2 hours, the hospital had received payment in full for Isabella's surgery. It was scheduled for the following week. I felt good about it, better than I had felt in a long time. I had done something meaningful, something that mattered. I had saved a little girl's life. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. That's when the calls started. David must have told someone who told someone else, and word spread that Marcus Chen, the tech millionaire, was giving money to people in need. My private number, which I thought was known only to close business associates and family, was suddenly ringing constantly with sob stories and desperate pleas. A woman whose house had burned down and who needed money for temporary housing. A man whose small business was failing and who needed a loan to keep his employees. A college student who couldn't afford her tuition and was about to drop out. A veteran who needed money for medical treatment that the VA wouldn't cover. Each story was heartbreaking. Each person was genuinely in need. And each call filled me with growing resentment. I had done one good deed, one act of kindness, and now I was being punished for it. My phone never stopped ringing. My email inbox was flooded with requests. People were showing up at my office building, asking the security guards to let them see me. I had Janet change my number and hired additional security. I had my legal team send cease and desist letters to the most persistent requesters. I built higher walls, installed better filters, created more barriers between myself and the desperate masses who saw me as their salvation. But the damage was done. The peace I had once found in my wealth, the sense that money could protect me from the messiness of other people's problems, was shattered. I started to see potential requesters everywhere. The barista at my coffee shop, who lingered a moment too long when handing me my drink. The parking attendant who smiled a little too widely. The woman in the elevator who seemed to be studying my face. Everyone wanted something from me. Everyone saw dollar signs when they looked at me. And I hated it. I hated that I had opened this door. I hated that my moment of weakness, because that's what I decided it was, had cost me my privacy and peace of mind. Most of all, I hated that I had been naive enough to think I could help one person without consequences. The solution seemed obvious. Never again. I would never again let emotion override logic. I would never again make decisions based on sentiment rather than strategy. I would protect my wealth and my privacy above all else, because if I didn't, I would be eaten alive by the endless need of the world. 6 months later, I got another call that tested this resolve. Marcus? The voice was familiar but strained. Emma? My sister rarely called during business hours. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something serious. Emma was 5 years younger than me, and we had once been close. She was a social worker in Denver, making barely enough to cover her student loans and rent on a small apartment. I had offered several times to pay off her debt or help her buy a house, but she had always refused, saying she wanted to make her own way. I respected that even if I didn't understand it. What's going on? I asked, glancing at my watch. I had a meeting in 10 minutes. It's about Mom and Dad. Our parents lived in the same middle-class neighborhood where we had grown up. Dad was a retired mechanic, Mom a former elementary school teacher. They had sacrificed a lot to put Emma and me through college, including taking out a second mortgage on their house that they were still paying off. What about them? I felt a familiar tightness in my chest whenever the conversation turned to our parents. They were proud of my success, but I could see the disconnect growing between us every time I visited. My world of private jets and five-star restaurants was so removed from their world of coupon clipping and early bird specials that we barely seemed to speak the same language anymore. Dad's been having chest pains. He went to the doctor and they want to do some tests, but his insurance won't cover all of it. And even if the tests come back okay, he needs to see a specialist, maybe get some procedures done. How much are we talking about? Maybe 20 or 30,000, depending on what they find. Marcus, they're scared to even get the test because they don't know how they'll pay for it. Dad said he'd rather take his chances than put the family in debt. The family. As if I wasn't part of it anymore. As if my money somehow excluded me from being their son. I'll take care of it, I said immediately. Marcus, no. They won't accept money from you. You know how they are about pride and independence. Then don't tell them it's from me. Set up a fake charity or something. Make it look like they won a raffle. They're not stupid, Marcus. They'll know it came from you. Then what do you want me to do, Emma? Let Dad die of a heart attack because he's too proud to accept help from his own son? I want you to talk to them. Not as their millionaire son who thinks money solves everything, but as their child who loves them and is scared for them. I want you to convince them that accepting help isn't a sign of weakness. But that would require me to admit that I was scared, that beneath all my wealth and success, I was still just a son who didn't want to lose his father. And I had spent years building walls against that kind of vulnerability. I don't have time for family therapy, Emma. I'll have my assistant set up a medical fund. If they won't take money directly from me, they can apply for assistance from the fund like anyone else. You're really going to hide behind intermediaries when it comes to our parents' health. I'm going to solve the problem in a way that respects their pride and gets Dad the medical care he needs. Isn't that what matters? Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was sad rather than angry. When did you become someone who can only connect with people through money, Marcus? When did that become the only way you know how to love? She hung up before I could answer, which was probably for the best, because I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but it wasn't one I wanted to face. I did set up the medical fund, and through a series of carefully orchestrated coincidences, my parents were selected as recipients of a grant that covered all of Dad's medical expenses. The test revealed a minor heart condition that was easily treatable with medication. Dad was fine, the family was relieved, and no one's pride was wounded. It should have been a perfect solution. Instead, it felt like another step away from the people I was supposed to care about most. I had saved my father's life from a distance, through lawyers and accountants and fake foundations, never once having to look him in the eye and say, "Dad, I love you and I want to help." The pattern continued. When Emma's car broke down and she couldn't afford repairs, a mysterious benefactor donated a reliable used car to the community center where she worked, and Emma just happened to win it in a raffle. When my parents' roof started leaking, they received an unexpected insurance settlement that covered a complete replacement. When Emma's student loan servicer called to say her debt had been paid in full by an anonymous donor, she didn't even bother to call and thank me. I was helping the people I loved, but I was doing it in a way that kept me completely disconnected from them. I was like a god dispensing miracles from on high, never having to get my hands dirty with the messy reality of human need and gratitude and love. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was how I had been operating for years, not just with family, but with everyone. I lived in a world of intermediaries and barriers, of assistants and lawyers and accountants who handled all the unpleasant details of human interaction. I never had to see the people I turned down for help, never had to look David Ramirez in the eye when I initially refused to save his daughter's life. Money hadn't just changed how others saw me, it had changed how I saw others. It had turned human beings into problems to be solved or avoided, rather than people to be known and loved. This realization might have been the beginning of wisdom, but it was interrupted by the biggest crisis of my professional life. CloudSync had been built on a revolutionary data management system that I had developed in college. It was elegant, efficient, and supposedly unhackable. That last part turned out to be spectacularly wrong. The breach happened on a Thursday in March. By Friday morning, the personal data of over 50 million users had been compromised, including social security numbers, credit card information, and private communications. By the following Monday, lawsuits were being filed, government investigations were launched, and CloudSync's stock price had fallen by 60%. The technical failure was bad enough, but the real damage came from how I handled the crisis. Instead of taking responsibility, I threw my development team under the bus. Instead of showing empathy for the users whose privacy had been violated, I focused on protecting the company's assets. Instead of being a leader, I was a damage control specialist, more concerned with my own reputation than with the harm that had been done. The media, which had once praised my vision and innovation, turned on me with savage intensity. Tech bro Marcus Chen shows his true colors, read one headline. How a data breach revealed to CEOs a complete lack of empathy, read another. The story wasn't just about the security failure, it was about my cold corporate response to it, my apparent inability to understand that real people had been hurt by my company's negligence. Within 6 months, I was forced out as CEO. The board of directors, led by investors who had once considered me a golden boy, decided that I had become a liability. They offered me a generous severance package and the opportunity to maintain my stake in the company, but they made it clear that my leadership days at CloudSync were over. I was 37 years old, worth more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, and I had no idea what to do with myself. For the first time since college, I didn't have a company to run, employees to manage, or deals to close. I had complete freedom and unlimited resources, and I was miserable. I tried traveling, spending months in Europe and Asia, staying in the world's most exclusive resorts, and eating at restaurants that required reservations booked years in advance. But everywhere I went, I was alone. Not physically. I was always surrounded by hotel staff and tour guides and fellow wealthy tourists, but emotionally, spiritually alone in a way that no amount of luxury could touch. I tried philanthropy, setting up a foundation and writing checks to various causes, but even my attempts at giving felt hollow and self-serving. I was buying good press and tax deductions, not actually making connections with the people I was supposedly helping. I tried dating, going out with a string of beautiful, accomplished women who moved in the same elite circles I did. But every relationship felt transactional. Were they interested in me or in my net worth? Was I interested in them or in having an appropriately impressive girlfriend to bring to social events? I couldn't tell the difference anymore, and neither could they. The lowest point came during a visit to my parents for Christmas. I hadn't seen them in person for over a year, though I had continued to orchestrate various forms of anonymous assistance for them. They were grateful for their good fortune. Dad's health was excellent, their house was in perfect repair, Emma's life was going well, but they seemed confused by it all. It's the strangest thing, Mom said as we sat in their living room, which I had secretly had redecorated by a high-end interior designer. It's like we have a guardian angel looking out for us. I should have felt proud. I should have felt good about taking care of my family. Instead, I felt like a fraud. Maybe you do, I said. Dad laughed. Well, if we do, I hope he knows how grateful we are. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I had felt genuinely happy. Not successful, not accomplished, not wealthy. Happy. It had been years, maybe a decade. Success had become a drug, each achievement requiring a bigger hit to produce the same high, until finally no amount of money or recognition could make me feel anything at all. I thought about David Ramirez and his daughter. That moment when I had decided to help had been the last time I remembered feeling truly good about something I had done. Not good because it was smart or profitable or strategic, but good because it was right. On impulse, I looked up Isabella's GoFundMe page, which was still active, though her surgery had been completed years earlier. David had posted updates regularly, sharing photos of Isabella's recovery and expressing gratitude to all who had helped. The most recent post was from just a few weeks earlier. Isabella, now 11 years old, healthy and smiling, at her school's science fair where she had won first place for a project about artificial hearts. Isabella wants to be a doctor when she grows up, David had written, so she can help other kids the way she was helped. She says she wants to pay it forward. Pay it forward. A little girl who had been given a second chance at life wanted to use that chance to help others. Meanwhile, I had been given every possible advantage: intelligence, education, opportunities, wealth beyond measure, and what was I doing with it? Hiding in luxury hotels and feeling sorry for myself. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I flew back to New York the day after Christmas and called my real estate agent. I wanted to sell the penthouse, I told him. All of it. The apartment, the furniture, the art collection, everything. I also wanted to sell the house in the Hamptons, the condo in Aspen, and the villa in Tuscany that I visited maybe twice a year. Are you downsizing? He asked, probably thinking I meant to buy a slightly smaller penthouse. You could say that. Next, I called my accountant and told him I wanted to liquidate most of my assets: stocks, bonds, business investments. I wanted to convert everything possible into cash. He was alarmed, thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. Marcus, are you in some kind of trouble? Legal issues? Gambling debts? No trouble, I assured him. I'm just restructuring my life. The process took several months, but by the end of the summer, I had liquidated nearly 90% of my assets. The money, close to $36 million, was sitting in a special account I had set up, waiting for me to figure out what to do with it. While I was selling off my old life, I was also searching for a new one. I spent weeks driving around New York City, looking at neighborhoods I had never really explored, despite living there for over a decade. I walked through Queens, the Bronx, Brooklyn, places that had been nothing more than names on a map to me when I lived in Manhattan. I found the studio apartment in a 5-story walk-up in Astoria, Queens. 300 square feet on the 4th floor with a Murphy bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom barely large enough for one person. The rent was $1,800 a month, which was probably more than I needed to pay, but far less than I had been spending on hotel rooms during my soul-searching travels. My real estate agent thought I had lost my mind. My accountant suggested I see a therapist. My few remaining friends assumed I was having some kind of midlife crisis and would come to my senses soon enough. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was making a decision based on what I needed rather than what I thought I should want. The first night in my new apartment was the strangest night of my life. After years of living in spaces so large that I sometimes forgot which room I had left my phone in, I was in a place where I could touch every wall without moving more than a few feet. Instead of feeling claustrophobic, I felt cozy, safe, like I was in a cocoon where I could figure out who I wanted to be next. I had brought almost nothing with me from my old life: a few changes of clothes, a laptop, some books I had been meaning to read for years. Everything I owned could fit in 2 suitcases and a backpack. After decades of accumulating possessions I never used and spaces I never fully inhabited, the simplicity was intoxicating. That first week I did things I hadn't done in years. I went to the bodega on the corner and bought my own groceries instead of having meals prepared by a chef. I took the subway instead of calling a car service. I did my own laundry in the building's basement laundromat, sitting next to my neighbors and reading a paperback novel while my clothes tumbled in machines that required quarters. It should have been a culture shock, going from penthouse to studio, from car service to subway, from chef to hot plate. Instead, it felt like coming home to a life I had forgotten I wanted. The hardest part wasn't the physical adjustment. It was figuring out what to do with my time. For the first time since college, I didn't have a job, a company to run, or investments to manage. I had no meetings, no conference calls, no assistants scheduling my every moment. I had complete freedom, and it was terrifying. For the first few weeks, I fell into a depression that was different from anything I had experienced during my wealthy years. This wasn't the existential emptiness of having everything and feeling nothing. This was the raw fear of having no structure, no purpose, no definition of success to chase. I spent entire days in my Murphy bed, staring out the single window at the building across the street. I ordered takeout and watched Netflix and tried to remember what I had enjoyed doing before making money became my full-time occupation. The breakthrough came when I was forced to leave the apartment to do laundry. As I was folding my clothes in the basement, an elderly woman at the next machine struck up a conversation. "You're the new tenant in 4B, right?" she asked. Her name was Rosa, and she had lived in the building for over 20 years. "That's me," Still getting settled. It's a good building, good people. You work in the city? It was such a simple question, but I realized I didn't know how to answer it. What did I do? Who was I without my title, my company, my public identity as a successful entrepreneur? I'm between jobs right now, I said, which was technically true. Well, if you're looking for something to do while you figure things out, the community center down the block is always looking for volunteers. They run programs for kids after school, help with homework and such. You seem like an educated guy. I bet you could help some of those kids with their studies. The idea of volunteering had never occurred to me. Throughout my business career, I had served on various boards and committees, but that was networking, not service. The idea of showing up somewhere and helping people without any agenda, without any expectation of return, was foreign. But I had nothing else to do, and Rosa seemed like the kind of person who wouldn't take no for an answer. The Astoria Community Center was a converted school building that served hundreds of families in the neighborhood. The after-school program ran from 3 to 6 p.m., helping elementary and middle school students with homework and providing a safe place for them to stay while their parents were still at work. The director, a woman named Carmen, who looked to be about my age, was initially skeptical when I showed up asking to volunteer. "What's your background?" she asked, looking me up and down. I was dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, but I probably still looked out of place in a community center in Queens. I have a degree in computer science and an MBA. I've run businesses, managed teams. I didn't mention the size of those businesses or the fact that my net worth was still hovering around $40 million. dollars. Can you help an 8-year-old with long division? I think so. Can you be patient with a kid who's struggling to read and doesn't want anyone to know it? I can try. Carmen studied me for another moment, then shrugged. We'll see how it goes. We can always use another pair of hands. That first afternoon, I was assigned to work with a group of fourth graders on their math homework. It was chaos. Kids talking over each other, papers scattered everywhere, pencils being used as drumsticks instead of writing instruments. After years of boardroom presentations and carefully orchestrated meetings, it was complete sensory overload. But something about it felt right. These kids needed help, real help, not just money thrown at a problem from a distance. They needed someone to sit with them, to explain fractions for the third time, to remind them to carry the one, to tell them they were smart even when they felt stupid. There was one kid in particular, a boy named Miguel, who reminded me of myself at that age. He was quiet, serious, and clearly smarter than he gave himself credit for. He would get frustrated when he didn't understand something immediately, balling up his papers and pushing away from the table. "I'm too stupid for this," he said during my second week there, after struggling with a word problem about calculating the area of a rectangle. "You're not stupid," I told him. "You just need to break it down into smaller steps." I showed him how to identify what the problem was asking for, what information he had, and what formula he needed to use. I drew pictures to help him visualize the problem. Most importantly, I stayed patient when he made mistakes, helping him find the errors instead of just giving him the answers. By the end of the month, Miguel was one of the strongest math students in the group. But more than that, he had developed confidence in his ability to learn. He stopped calling himself stupid and started raising his hand to ask questions when he didn't understand something. "You're good at this," Carmen told me one afternoon as we cleaned up after the kids had gone home. "At math? At teaching, at connecting with kids. Miguel's teacher says he's like a different student this semester." That compliment meant more to me than any business award I had ever received. I was making a difference in a way that was immediate and tangible. I could see the results of my work in Miguel's improved test scores, in the way another student's face lit up when she finally understood fractions, in the gratitude of parents who appreciated having someone help their children succeed. For the first time in years, I looked forward to getting up each morning. Not because I had deals to close or money to make, but because I had kids to help and problems to solve that actually mattered. After 3 months of volunteering, Carmen offered me a part-time position as a tutor coordinator. The salary was $30,000 a year, which was probably less than I had been spending on car services when I lived in Manhattan. I took the job immediately. The work was hard in ways that business had never been. Kids don't respond to market incentives or competitive strategies. You can't motivate an 11-year-old with stock options or performance bonuses. Success is measured not in quarterly profits, but in tiny victories. a child who finally masters multiplication tables, a shy student who starts participating in group discussions, a teenager who decides not to drop out of school. But it was also rewarding in ways that making money had never been. Every day I could see the direct impact of my work. I was helping kids who reminded me of my younger self, smart, ambitious, but lacking the resources and support they needed to reach their potential. 6 months into my new life, I made a decision about the $36 million sitting in my bank account. I was going to give it away, but not in the way I had tried before. No anonymous donations, no fake foundations, no barriers between me and the people I was helping. I was going to do it right this time. I started with David Ramirez. I looked up his number, the same one he had called me from 3 years earlier, and dialed. He answered on the third ring. David, this is Marcus Chen. We spoke a few years ago about your daughter Isabella's surgery. There was a pause. Marcus. Wow, I never got the chance to properly thank you for what you did. Isabella is doing great, by the way. She's healthy and happy and wants to be a doctor someday. I know, I saw the updates on your GoFundMe page. That's actually why I'm calling. I have a proposition for you. I met David at a coffee shop in Queens the following Saturday. He was exactly what I had expected. Tired looking from working 2 jobs, but with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. He brought Isabella with him, and she was even more beautiful in person than in the photos, radiating the kind of energy that comes from being 11 years old and having your whole life ahead of you. Isabella, this is Marcus, David said as they sat down across from me. He's the man who helped make your surgery possible. Isabella looked at me with the serious expression kids get when they're trying to be polite to adults. Thank you for helping me, she said. Daddy says you saved my life. You're welcome, I said, feeling my throat tighten unexpectedly. Your dad told me you want to be a doctor when you grow up. Yes, I want to fix other kids' hearts like the doctors fixed mine. Daddy says medical school is really expensive, but I'm going to work hard and get scholarships. That's when I made my offer to David. I wanted to establish a scholarship fund, not just for Isabella, but for other kids in similar situations. Kids whose families couldn't afford college, who had overcome medical challenges or other obstacles, who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare or education or social work. Fields where they could help others the way they had been helped. I don't understand, David said. You want to give away scholarship money? A lot of scholarship money. Enough to put dozens of kids through college every year indefinitely. David looked skeptical. What's the catch? What do you get out of it? It was a fair question. In my old life, every business relationship had been transactional. People didn't give away millions of dollars without expecting something in return. I get to see kids like Isabella become doctors, I said. I get to be part of something that matters. But why us? Why Isabella? I thought about how to explain it. How do you tell someone that his desperate phone call had been the beginning of your salvation? That his daughter's courage had reminded you of something you had forgotten about yourself? 3 years ago, when you called me, I almost said no. Actually, I did say no, initially. But something about Isabella's story, something about your love for her, made me change my mind. It was the best decision I ever made, not because it was good for business or good for my reputation, but because it was just good. I want to feel that way more often. We spent the next 2 hours talking about the details. The scholarship fund would be administered by the community center where I worked, ensuring that recipients were chosen based on need and merit rather than connections or politics. David would serve on the selection committee, helping to identify candidates and mentor recipients. Isabella would be the first scholarship recipient when she was ready for college, but she wouldn't be the last. We would start with enough money to fund full scholarships for 10 students each year, with the goal of expanding as we found more worthy candidates. As we were getting ready to leave, Isabella tugged on my sleeve. Mr. Marcus, she said, are you sure you want to give away all that money? Don't you need it for yourself? I knelt down so I was at her eye level. You know what, Isabella? I thought I needed it, but it turns out I need you to become a doctor, more than I need another fancy car. She smiled at that, the same brilliant smile I had seen in her hospital photos. Okay, but when I'm a doctor, I'm going to take really good care of you when you get old. That was the moment I knew I was doing the right thing. The scholarship fund was just the beginning. Over the next year, I systematically gave away most of my remaining wealth, but I did it thoughtfully, strategically, and personally. I funded after school programs in underserved communities. I paid off medical debt for families facing bankruptcy. I provided microloans to small business owners who couldn't get traditional bank financing. But most importantly, I stayed involved. Instead of writing checks and walking away, I became part of these projects. I tutored kids in the after school programs I funded. I mentored the small business owners who received loans. I visited families whose medical debt I had paid off, not to be thanked, but to understand their stories and learn from their experiences. Emma was the first family member to figure out what I was doing. She showed up at my apartment one evening without warning, looking confused and concerned. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" she demanded as soon as I let her in. Mom and Dad got a call from some lawyer saying an anonymous benefactor had paid off their mortgage. Their mortgage, Marcus. That's over $100,000. I had been wondering when this conversation would happen. "Sit down, Em." She looked around my tiny apartment, taking in the Murphy bed, the hot plate, the fact that my entire living space was smaller than her bedroom back in Denver. "Where's all your stuff?" "Where are you really living?" "This is where I really live." "This?" She gestured at the cramped space. "Marcus, this place is smaller than my first apartment out of college. Where's your furniture? Where are your cars? What happened to the penthouse?" I made us tea using my hot plate and told her everything. About the phone call from David, about the data breach and losing my company, about the months of depression and soul searching, about finding purpose again at the community center. "You gave away $36 million," she said when I finished. "Most of it. I kept about $4 million for myself, which is more than I'll ever need." "But Marcus, that was your security, your retirement, your everything." "No, it wasn't." "I thought it was, but it wasn't." "You know what my everything is now? It's Miguel getting excited about solving math problems. It's Isabella wanting to be a doctor. It's knowing that when I go to sleep at night, I've spent the day doing something that actually matters." Emma was quiet for a long time, staring out my single window at the brick building across the street. "Are you happy?" she finally asked. "For the first time in years, yes, I'm genuinely happy." "But don't you miss it? The success, the recognition, the power?" "I miss parts of it sometimes. I miss the feeling of closing a big deal, the rush of seeing your company's stock price go up. But I don't miss the person I became. I don't miss being so disconnected from real life that I could hang up on a desperate father asking for help to save his daughter." "You helped Isabella in the end." "But almost didn't. And when I did help, I spent months regretting it, because it inconvenienced me." "What kind of person thinks saving a child's life is an inconvenience?" Emma reached across my tiny table and took my hand. "A person who got lost for a while but found his way back." That conversation with Emma led to one of the most difficult but necessary conversations of my life, telling my parents the truth about their good fortune over the past few years. I drove up to their house the following weekend, the same house where I had grown up, where they had sacrificed so much to give Emma and me opportunities they never had. Sitting in their living room, which I had secretly redecorated, though I now saw it was too formal, not really their style, I confessed everything. I told them about Dad's medical fund, about Emma's mysteriously paid off student loans, about their mortgage being satisfied by an anonymous benefactor. I told them about my new life, about giving away most of my wealth, about finding meaning in work that paid $30,000 a year instead of $30 million. Dad was quiet through most of my explanation, but Mom cried. Not tears of anger or disappointment, but something more complex. "We knew," she finally said. "We knew it was you." "You knew?" "Marcus, we raised you. We know how you think, how you solve problems. When all these wonderful things started happening to us right after you became successful, we put two and two together." "Why didn't you say anything?" Dad spoke for the first time since I had started talking. "Because we could tell you needed to do it that way. You needed to help us, but you couldn't figure out how to do it directly. We figured you'd tell us when you were ready." "Are you angry? That I lied about it?" Mom smiled, the same smile she had given me when I was 7 years old, and she was driving me to the hospital for my tonsil surgery. Honey, we're proud of you. Not for the money, we were never impressed by the money. We're proud that you remembered how to be our son. That night, I helped Dad fix a leaky faucet in their kitchen, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. As we worked together, our hands covered in plumber's grease, talking about water pressure and pipe fittings instead of stock prices and market trends, I felt more like myself than I had in 20 years. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. There were days when I missed my old life, when I walked past luxury car dealerships or expensive restaurants, and felt a pang of longing for the days when I could have anything I wanted. There were moments of doubt when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, giving up financial security for the uncertain rewards of service and connection. But those moments became fewer and farther between as my new life took shape. I developed routines that grounded me. Morning coffee at the bodega where Mrs. Kim, the owner, would update me on her grandson's progress in school. Afternoon tutoring sessions where I watched kids discover they were smarter than they thought. Evening walks through my neighborhood where I was no longer an outsider looking in, but part of a community. I made friends for the first time in years, real friends, not business contacts or networking opportunities. There was Rosa from my building who invited me to her grandson's quinceañera. There was Carmen from the community center, who became a trusted colleague and eventually something more. There was Miguel's father, Roberto, who taught me how to change my own oil and invited me to watch soccer games at his local bar. These relationships weren't transactional. Nobody wanted anything from me except my time and attention and genuine care. They didn't know about my financial past, didn't see dollar signs when they looked at me. They saw Marcus, the guy who helped their kids with homework, who remembered their birthdays, who showed up when they needed help moving furniture or dealing with a family crisis. 1 year after I had started volunteering at the community center, Carmen asked me to speak at the annual fundraising dinner. It was a small event compared to the charity galas I used to attend. Maybe 100 people in a community center gym decorated with streamers and balloons instead of a hotel ballroom with crystal chandeliers. But the audience was different too. These weren't wealthy philanthropists writing tax-deductible checks. These were parents who worked multiple jobs, teachers who spent their own money on school supplies, local business owners who donated time and services even when they could barely afford it themselves. I had been nervous about the speech for weeks. What could I say to these people who had been doing meaningful work their entire lives while I had been accumulating wealth and status? A few years ago, I thought success meant having enough money to buy anything I wanted. I had penthouses and private jets and more cars than I knew what to do with. I was miserable, but I thought that was the price of success. I told them about David's phone call, about initially refusing to help Isabella, about the moment when I realized that all my wealth meant nothing if I couldn't use it to help a sick child. The richest I've ever felt, I said, was the day I got to tell David that his daughter's surgery was paid for. Not because it made me look good or because it was good for business, but because it was right. Because for once in my life, I had used my resources to solve a problem that actually mattered. I talked about the community center, about the kids I worked with, about learning that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in relationships and purpose and the ability to make a positive difference in the world. I'm worth about $4 million now, I said, which is still more money than I'll ever need. But my real wealth is sitting in this room. It's Miguel who used to think he was bad at math and now wants to be an engineer. It's Isabella who survived heart surgery and wants to be a doctor so she can help other kids. It's all of you who taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. The applause was different from what I used to receive at business conferences. It was warmer, more genuine. These people weren't clapping for my accomplishments or my wealth. They were celebrating a shared understanding of what really matters. After the dinner, as I was helping stack chairs and fold tables, Carmen pulled me aside. "That was beautiful," she said. "But can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Giving up everything you worked so hard to build?" It was a question I had asked myself many times, especially during those first difficult months of adjustment. "I regret how long it took me to figure out what was important," I said. "I regret the years I wasted accumulating things that didn't make me happy. I regret almost saying no to David when he called for help. But giving up the money, living in a studio apartment, working for 30,000 a year instead of 30 million? I don't regret any of that. Why not? I thought about how to explain it, this thing that had taken me years to understand. Because I finally feel like myself again. Do you know what it's like to look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back at you? To realize you've become someone you don't even like? For years, I was living someone else's definition of success, chasing goals that didn't actually mean anything to me. Carmen nodded. As someone who had devoted her life to service, she understood the difference between external validation and internal fulfillment. I wake up every morning excited about my day, I continued, not because I'm going to make money or close deals or see my name in the newspaper, but because I'm going to help kids learn. I'm going to solve problems that matter. I'm going to be part of a community that actually cares about each other. And that's worth giving up $40 million? dollars? Carmen, I didn't give up $40 million. dollars. I invested it in something with a much better return. I invested it in becoming human again. That conversation happened 2 years ago. Since then, my life has continued to evolve in ways I never expected. Isabella is now 13 and still wants to be a doctor. She volunteers at the community center's summer program, helping younger kids with their homework the way I once helped her father navigate his crisis. She's going to be an extraordinary doctor someday, not just because she's smart, but because she understands what it means to be scared and vulnerable and in need of help. Miguel graduated from middle school at the top of his class and is excelling in high school. He's planning to study engineering in college, and he still stops by the community center to help current students with their math homework. Watching him explain fractions to frustrated fourth graders, I see the same patience and encouragement I tried to show him years ago. The scholarship fund has grown beyond what I initially imagined. Other donors have joined the program, inspired by the stories of our recipients. We now fund full scholarships for 25 students each year, and our first recipients are starting to graduate from college and enter careers in medicine, education, social work, and other fields where they can make a difference. Emma moved to New York last year and lives just a few subway stops away from me. She found a job with a nonprofit that provides legal services to low-income families, work that pays less than what she made in Denver but gives her more satisfaction. We have dinner together every Sunday, something we never did when I was wealthy and too busy for family time. My parents visit several times a year staying in my tiny apartment, despite my offers to put them up in nice hotels. Mom says she likes being close to me, and Dad has become something of a neighborhood celebrity, charming everyone at the bodega with stories about his son who used to be rich but got better. Carmen and I have been dating for over a year now. She's the first woman I've been with who knew me only as Marcus the tutor coordinator, not Marcus the millionaire CEO. She fell in love with someone who makes $30,000 a year and lives in a studio apartment. And that means more to me than all the admiration I used to receive for my wealth and status. The other day, she asked me if I missed having a bigger place, especially now that we're spending so much time together. Sometimes, I admitted, it would be nice to have a full-size kitchen or a living room where we could actually have friends over. So why don't we get a bigger place? You could afford it. It was true. I still have about $4 million dollars invested conservatively, generating enough income to live more comfortably if I wanted to. I could afford a one-bedroom apartment, or even a small house. Because this place reminds me who I am now, I said. Every morning when I wake up in this tiny space, I remember that I chose connection over isolation, purpose over profit, people over possessions. I'm afraid that if I get too comfortable again, I might forget those lessons. Carmen understood, but she also pushed back in the gentle way that people who love you do. Marcus, you don't have to live like a monk to prove you're a good person. There's a difference between being materialistic and being comfortable. You've learned the lessons. You don't have to keep punishing yourself. She was right, of course, the studio apartment had served its purpose as a symbol of my transformation. But symbols can become prisons if you're not careful. Staying in a space that was too small wasn't humility. It was self-imposed penance for crimes I had already atoned for. So last month, Carmen and I started looking at one-bedroom apartments in the same neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but big enough for a proper kitchen where we could cook together, a living room where we could host game nights with our friends from the community center, maybe even a small home office where I could work on expanding the scholarship program. As we toured apartments, I found myself thinking about what Emma had said years ago. that there's a difference between being materialistic and being comfortable. I had spent so long equating any material comfort with moral failure that I had forgotten the possibility of a middle ground. The apartment we chose is twice the size of my studio, but costs about the same as a single dinner used to cost during my wealthy years. It has hardwood floors that creak when you walk on them, a kitchen with enough space for two people to cook together, and windows that actually let in natural light. It's not luxurious, but it's home in a way that my penthouse never was. The moving day was strange. All of my possessions still fit in two suitcases and a few boxes: books, clothes, the laptop I use for work, and a small collection of photos documenting my new life. No expensive art, no designer furniture, no gadgets I bought but never used. As I carried my last box up the stairs to our new place, I thought about another move, years earlier. When I had hired a team of professional movers to transport rooms full of possessions I didn't really care about from one expensive address to another. This move at carrying my own boxes, Rosa from my old building helping me with the heavy items, Miguel and his father Roberto painting the new apartment as a housewarming gift, felt more real, more meaningful. That evening, as Carmen and I sat on the floor of our empty apartment, eating takeout pizza and planning where to put our minimal furniture, I realized something that would have shocked my former self. I was completely, genuinely happy. Not the manic happiness that comes from closing a big deal or seeing your net worth increase, but the quiet contentment that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the right person doing exactly the work that matters to you. Do you think you'll ever tell the kids at the center about your past? Carmen asked. About who you used to be? It was something I had wondered about myself. Some of the older students were starting to ask questions about my background, curious about how someone with my education had ended up as a tutor coordinator. Maybe someday, I said, when they're older, when they can understand the difference between having money and being rich. What would you tell them? I thought about it for a moment, imagining myself talking to Miguel or Isabella or the dozens of other kids I had worked with over the years. I'd tell them that I used to think success meant accumulating as much as possible, but I learned that it actually means contributing as much as possible. I'd tell them that the richest person isn't the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. And I'd tell them that the best investment I ever made was the day I decided to invest in people instead of portfolios. Carmen smiled. That's good. You should write that down. Maybe I will. Maybe someday I'll write a book about this experience, about learning to measure wealth in relationships instead of dollars, about discovering that the best way to find yourself is to lose everything you thought defined you. But for now, I'm content to live the story rather than tell it. Every morning, I wake up in an apartment that's small but sufficient, next to a woman who loves me for who I am rather than what I own. I walk to a job that pays me a fraction of what I used to make, but gives me more satisfaction than any business deal ever did. I work with kids who remind me daily that intelligence and potential exist everywhere, regardless of economic circumstances. Some evenings, I walk through my neighborhood and think about my old life. I pass the subway entrance where I used to wait for car services, the bodega where I now buy my groceries, the park where I now play pickup basketball with Roberto and his friends instead of playing golf at exclusive country clubs. I don't miss the old life, but I'm grateful for it in a strange way. Without experiencing the emptiness of having everything, I might never have discovered the fullness of having enough. Without losing my way so completely, I might never have found my purpose. The other night, Isabella stopped by the community center while I was staying late to prepare materials for the next day's tutoring sessions. She's 14 now, confident and articulate, already showing the leadership qualities that will make her an excellent doctor. Mr. Marcus, she said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. My dad told me that you used to be really rich before you started working here. Like really, really rich. I wondered how much David had told her, how much she could understand at 14 about the choices adults make and the reasons behind them. That's true, I said. Why did you give it all up? I mean, you could have helped people and still lived in a nice house and driven a nice car. It was a fair question, the same one Emma had asked, the same one I had asked myself countless times during the difficult months of transition. You know how sometimes when you're studying, you get so focused on memorizing facts for a test that you forget why you wanted to learn the subject in the first place? Isabella nodded. That's what happened to me with money. I got so focused on making more of it that I forgot why I wanted it in the first place. I forgot that money is supposed to be a tool to help you live a good life, not the definition of a good life. But you could have just remembered that and kept the money. I tried. But I had been thinking about money wrong for so long that I couldn't trust myself to think about it right. I had to start over completely, figure out what actually made me happy when money wasn't part of the equation. And this makes you happy? Living in a tiny apartment and working for not very much money? I looked around the community center, at the bulletin boards covered with photos of successful students, at the worn but comfortable furniture donated by local families, at the whiteboard where I had been working out math problems to help prepare for the next day's sessions. Isabella, I know this might be hard to understand when you're 14 and thinking about all the things you want to do and have when you're older. But yes, this makes me happier than having millions of dollars ever did. Why? Because this is real. The relationships I have now are real. People like me for who I am, not what I can do for them. The work I do matters. I can see the difference I'm making in real time. And I know exactly who I am and what I value, which I didn't when I was rich. Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing what I had said. When I'm a doctor, she said finally, I want to remember this conversation. I want to remember that helping people is more important than making money. You can do both, I told her. You can make a good living as a doctor and still help people. The trick is to never let making money become more important than the reason you became a doctor in the first place. Will you remind me if I forget? Always. As Isabella left that evening, I realized that this conversation encapsulated everything I had learned over the past few years. Success isn't about accumulating resources, it's about using whatever resources you have to create meaning and connection and positive change in the world. I'm worth $4 million now, down from $40 million at my peak. I live in a one-bedroom apartment instead of a penthouse, take the subway instead of private jets, cook on a regular stove instead of having meals prepared by a personal chef. By most conventional measures, I have less than I used to have. But I wake up every morning excited about my day. I work with people I genuinely care about on problems that genuinely matter. I have real relationships based on mutual respect and affection, rather than transactional exchanges of money and favors. I sleep well at night knowing that I spent my day doing something worthwhile. I'm worth $4 million dollars and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens with the woman I love, doing work that feeds my soul rather than just my bank account. And I've never been richer in my life. The story isn't over. I'm only 40 years old, and I hope to have many more years of this life I've chosen. The scholarship program is expanding, the community center is growing, and there are more kids to help, more connections to make, more ways to use whatever resources I have to make a positive difference. But if someone asked me today to define success, I wouldn't talk about net worth or stock prices or business achievements. I would talk about Miguel's confidence in his mathematical abilities. I would talk about Isabella's determination to become a doctor so she can help other children. I would talk about Carmen's smile when she sees how excited I get about a student's breakthrough. I would talk about learning that the best way to invest your money is to invest it in people, and the best way to invest your life is to spend it in service to something larger than yourself. I'm worth $40 million dollars and I live in a small studio, well, a one-bedroom now, and here's why. Because I finally figured out the difference between being wealthy and being rich. Being wealthy is about accumulation. Being rich is about contribution. Being wealthy is about what you have. Being rich is about who you are and what you give. I spent years being wealthy but poor in all the ways that actually matter. Now I have less money but more wealth than I ever imagined possible. The wealth of purpose, of connection, of knowing that when I leave this world it will be a little bit better. Because I was here, that's worth more than $40 million. That's worth everything.